Greetings and welcome to the Den. I'm Wolf Bear, and before we launch into story time, I just want to give a brief context for today. If you don't really care about context or behind the scenes info, feel free to jump ahead to this time. Anyway, I'll be reading a short fictional story based on some of my own characters, two teen girls named Chris and Eden. I say based on because this is technically an alternate universe where these characters live normal human high school lives instead of the crazy fantasy world stuff that happens in the canon. This story is narrated by Eden, who, despite being one of the five main characters, is a perspective I hadn't written from before this, and was a bit trickier to write because of her unique worldviews compared to others. Eden is a lot more cheery and optimistic, but also a bit sheltered and naive, which makes her a bit of an unreliable narrator and harder to define the events happening around her because she's not always aware of them. I'm pretty sure I smoothed everything out here in terms of understandability in this latest draft, but if something confuses you, feel free to let me know in the comments, and I'll be happy to clarify what I meant. Also, I am indeed a romantic, so writing romance bit outside of my usual circle, seeing as I literally do not experience romantic attraction and feelings like most people do. I gave it my best shot here, but yeah, I'm trying to write something I've never experienced and can barely understand, so please be nice. Now, enough about me. Let's dive into what you came here for fluffy sapphic drama. I present to you Butterflies. They say butterflies flap all around your stomach when you see the love of your life. Like, you just feel all giddy and happy and you just know they're the one. It's what all the movies said, my friends said, my older cousins said, even my mom said it. I always thought it would be this great big bang, a sudden burst of an entire field's worth of butterflies tickling their wings against my heart, and I'd blush with joy at seeing them for the first time, the love of my life. It's not exactly that it was all a lie, but I didn't feel any of those butterflies when I first saw her. In first grade, I sat next to a girl with long dark hair that contrasted her yellow sundress and the pale cast on her arm. Her real name was too long for her to say properly at the time, and either way she didn't like it, so she went by Chris. During recess, I taught her to make daisy chains, and we made bracelets for each other out of them. It would feel like something of a first heartbreak when those flowers inevitably wilted a couple of days later. On the second day of school, Chris taught me to whistle. Sort of. It wasn't very effective with the gaps between our teeth, but it's the effort that matters, right? Throughout all of elementary school, we continued to sit next to each other, make daisy chains, play hopscotch, and try to surpass each other in jump rope. We would watch movies at my house after she came over for dinner. We'd chase down the ice cream truck, the blue and pink striped one that Chris insisted had the best mint chip. We would try to do homework together, only to get so little done because we would just get so wrapped up in talking and laughing. Though, to this day, I'm convinced I wouldn't have memorized my times tables without her, and she wouldn't have been able to spell surprise without me. She was my best friend. She wasn't my crush. My crush around then was some boy named Damien. I was convinced Damien and I would go to prom together someday, years in the future. You know how little girls dream, but looking back, I only liked him because his hair was curly like mine. Then the worst possible thing happened. We had to go to different middle schools, and we started to drift apart after that. Chris stopped coming over to my house, and I didn't know where she lived, so I couldn't go visit her. But I did know where her new school was, so since I started walking home on my own, I started taking detours to pass Chris's school, scanning through the chain link fence and hoping I could see her there. After a few days, I did. She was outside with 3 other kids, her back to me. I called out, but it seemed she didn't hear me. I shouted her name and waved, and while the others, all looking like something from a punk album cover, turned to look at me, Chris just didn't. One of them nudged her and gestured at me, saying something I couldn't hear, and Chris finally gave in and walked in my direction, turning her head over her shoulder to say something that made the others snigger. She stood in front of me, on the other side of the chain link fence, wearing an oversized black leather jacket and a frown. "Get out of here, Eden. You're not supposed to be here." Putting my hand to the fence, I asked why. I asked if she was okay. I asked if I could meet her new friends. I asked if she wanted to hang out later. "No," she said, her voice growing sharp. "Just get out of here." Chris walked away, not once looking back, and my smile just fell right from my face. I stopped trying to contact her after that. You understand, I'm sure. I didn't feel any butterflies either in high school when Chris slammed her locker door shut, barely looking at me when she passed me by, only 2 lockers over, in the hall. I didn't ever think we'd end up in the same high school. I hadn't seen or thought of her in years, but it was like we no longer existed in the same world. Seeing her again felt like the opposite of butterflies. More like, I don't know, nails. Yeah, nails sharper than the spikes around her wrist, because she was no butterfly. She was a moth. Something dark that worms its way inside you and sucks away your light. Well, I guess it's not really fair to moths, but this whole punk goth aesthetic she had now fully adopted, all black and brooding and leather, and certainly seemed more like a moth. She finally grew into that leather jacket, it seemed. The dark circles under her half-lidded eyes, the near-permanent frown that only rarely changed to a biting smirk, this indifference she put out into the world, I knew her well enough to know it wasn't faked for popularity's sake or just to blend in. It was really her. I think that's what hurt most. Don't act as dumb as you look. Isn't the most romantic thing one can hear, especially when the person saying it to you hasn't spoken to you in years. So, of course I didn't feel butterflies then. See, I had been talking with this guy named Matt after school, at the edge of the hallway that led to the field, no one else around. He had been asking about a homework assignment, getting closer and closer to me. I tried to take a step back, but I realized I was already against the wall. He put a hand on my waist, another in my hair. My smile started to flicker. What was he doing? Eden, there you are. I've been looking for you. I looked over my shoulder, almost in disbelief at the voice. Chris was walking towards us. Matt backed away from me, took his hands off me. We're late for a club meeting, come on, Chris said. We weren't in any clubs together, so I asked her what could she be talking about, confused as to why she would talk to me again. You know, the club, Chris replied bluntly, briefly glancing over at Matt suspiciously. I stood there frozen for a moment more before Chris just took my hand and led me away, saying she'd walk me there. Don't act as dumb as you look, she grumbled, looking over her shoulder. I was offering you an out, why didn't you take it? I asked Chris what she was talking about, but all she said in reply was, Trust me, Eden. I don't know why, but I did. I followed her. Got all your stuff? She said, checking over her shoulder again before letting me go. I replied in confusion, clutching my book bag a little tighter as reassurance and still walking alongside her. Good. I'm walking you home. Same address? I said yes again, like some echoing parrot, so tied up in all the quick changes. What about the club she had mentioned? What club even was it? What has she been talking about? Chris just sighed in annoyance. Doesn't matter. There is no club. Just stay away from that guy. I know him. He's dangerous. But I didn't get it. I remarked Matt only wanted help with homework. Chris hesitated and settled on not replying with anything other than a shake of her head as she shoved her hands in the pockets of her black leather jacket. We walked down the street. The sunny spring afternoon felt awfully cheery compared to the awkwardness of our stroll. When I reached the porch of my house, I paused, and as I reached for the brass door handle, I turned around. See, I could smell the fresh cookies my mom made, oatmeal, without the raisins, and I remembered they were Chris's favorite. I offered to let her in. Shouldn't, Chris grumbled. Standing on my porch, watching her walk away, I just wanted to know if I would see her tomorrow. Well, I knew I would. Our lockers were practically next to each other, but I didn't know if she would go back to ignoring me. I definitely didn't feel those rumored butterflies when I found Chris the next morning. I was at my locker when I heard her walk up to her own, fiddling with the lock and mumbling curses to herself. I closed my locker and turned to hand her a bag of cookies with a smile, but my words froze on my tongue. The side of Chris's face was already bruising, little orbs of blood forming and dropping from a cut in her cheekbone. Chris wasn't really looking at me as she reached to take out the bag with a mumbled thank you, but I noticed the knuckles of her left hand blooming in the deep shades of a bruise. I barely glanced at the clock on the opposite wall before taking her hand instead of giving her the cookies. I led her to the bathroom. She couldn't go to class looking like that. Chris leaned up against the wall, crossing her arms over her chest and watching me cautiously while I set the cookies on the counter and got the sink running cold water. Well, cool water. School pipes never really run completely hot or cold. I mean, you know, but it was the best I could get at the time. I pulled a few paper towels out of the dispenser and I asked her what happened, but she didn't answer. Wetting the towels in the sink, I asked if she got in a fight. Yeah, Don't worry, I messed him up way more than he did me," she said with a sort of smirk, as if that was something she should have been proud of. The paper towels in the school bathroom are never very good either, so I sort of just wadded them together. I nudged her chin up with the back of my hand and pressed the soggy towel ball against the bruised side of her face. She closed her eyes tightly. I asked if it still hurt. She said no, but I think that might have been a lie. I asked if it was broken, if that was even possible. She nudged me away and took the towel wad in her own hand to keep it on her face. "Yes, that's possible. No, it's not broken. I know what broken feels like, and this ain't it. Matt throws a weak-ass punch anyway." She got in a fight with Matt? I don't usually stutter, but I couldn't piece together thoughts. What would she possibly fight Matt for? Chris said, "Doesn't matter. He won't be bothering you anymore." A buzzer echoed through the school, warning of only 5 minutes before classes began. Chris wiped her face once more to check the bleeding stopped before she hauled her bag back onto her shoulder, grabbed the bag of cookies off the counter, and headed toward the door. She paused and turned back to me. "Hey, Eden." "Thanks." I told her it was okay, my mom always overbakes when it comes to cookies. "No, I meant about this." She gestured to her face. I found myself only asking her to not do any more stupid things like that. Chris smirked and headed to class. "Yeah, no promises." She walked me home from school again that day, and every day after that, and it didn't feel so awkward anymore. I'm not quite sure how it happened. It wasn't right away, but we became friends again, close as if we never parted. We hung out after school, we did homework together, sometimes she'd still stay over for dinner. She gave me her jacket when it unexpectedly started raining. I gave her a beaded bracelet I made with daisy charms. I promised that this one wouldn't wilt. She started wearing it in place of the spikes. School ended and we spent all of summer together, going to carnivals and picnics, making pinecone bird feeders, and chasing down that ice cream truck. One night we were at my family's house, watching a movie and sitting on the old, formerly white couch. It was that Disney movie where the kids of all the old villains tried to be friends with the kids of all the heroes. I recommended it because we used to watch it all the time as kids, and I knew Chris wouldn't say no because, well, she's always a sucker for musicals. Everything was going smoothly. We were enjoying the movie until Chris shifted uncomfortably, propping her elbow up on the broken armrest. And I don't know why, but she just started talking. It wasn't a rushed jumble, more cautious, as if simply speaking could have caused her tongue to explode like a stick of dynamite. She told me her mother died a few years ago. She told me that her father was always drunk. She told me that she's been looking after her brother for almost as long as she could remember. She said she had wanted me to be there with her so bad, to make the tough times easier, but she pushed me away because she felt she already lost me with the whole being in different schools thing, and she didn't want me to have to deal with her problems. As she poured out her soul, I just sat there, listening. Somehow I got closer and closer to her, so close our sides were almost touching, but she didn't push me away, so I stayed. I watched her face, her eyes, her lips, and I just listened. For once I didn't ask any questions. I didn't know what to say. Even though I tuned out the movie, it kept progressing, so by the time Chris fell silent once more, we were already at the scene of the two love interests' first date. Chris just stared forward at the screen as the dramatic love ballad started. Do you think she really deserves him, after everything she did?" she asked. I looked at her with this lopsided smile, saying it was such a silly question. The whole movie was just about that, anyhow. Besides, they love each other. Isn't that enough? Chris chuckled slightly and nodded as she finally looked my way. Wrapped up in the music, I started to hum along. Feeling something brush against my hand, I glanced down to see Chris's fingers bashfully, tentatively intertwining with mine, as if she was as nervous as the girl from the movie. I leaned into her, resting my head on her shoulder and giving her hand a gentle squeeze, and I felt her exhale and relax like she had been holding her breath all night. The movie ran its course, and before long, the big ending dance party scene started. I jumped to my feet to start dancing, twirling, lip-syncing to all the poppy lyrics. As I slowed down, getting a bit dizzy, I saw Chris looking up at me from the couch, and she smiled. She looked at me, and she smiled. A real smile, one that reached her eyes. And I froze for a moment because something changed. A different kind of dizzy, you could say. It started small, maybe just one, then 5, then a whole swarm. Butterflies. Butterflies. I reached out to her, taking her hands in mine and pulling her onto her feet. We danced to the music as the credits rolled. I told her I loved her on a late August night. We were laying in the outfield of a Little League diamond, absorbing the coolness rising up from the grass long after all the tween players went home piled in minivans. It was just us, the flickering yellow lights from the announcer's box, and the after-sunset breeze shifting my curls around. We were giggling and talking, staring up at the stars, but then it fell quiet, and the words just spilled out of my mouth. I love you. There was this moment where she stayed silent, stayed still, and it was like the whole world became still, so still that even the stars stopped moving. Then she turned her head so her eyes could meet mine, and she said, I love you too, and can I kiss you? Well, it shouldn't be surprising when I say that I felt all the butterflies then,